yeah, getting this thing started, man. What is it exactly that you do? What is Zach Leary's Dharma here?
What is Zach Leary's Dharma? Well, um, yeah, I guess simply put, I've rediscovered my Dharma, or I should say reinterpreted it more than once throughout my life for sure. But in the latest phase of my life and incarnation, simply put, it's just to help others, and to share the wisdom that I've accumulated and picked up along the way, thanks to a lot of the wonderful mentors who have come before me, to take that wisdom and kind of put it in a structure that can help others in a way that makes sense for them, meeting people where they're at, and in a way that makes sense for me, that feels authentic and has integrity and has kind of components of everything that I'm interested in and everything that I'm good at, which is, in some ways practical spirituality for sure. Science and research, Dharma, helping people uncover their own Dharmas and figuring out what that is, healing, maybe just chipping away at whatever I can do to alleviate suffering in even just the smallest little way possible. I think if we all have an opportunity to alleviate suffering, even if it's just a tiny bit, collectively, that really makes a big difference. Yeah. So in practical terms, in a pragmatic sense, not a philosophical one. I work in the psychedelic space, as a facilitator, as an educator, as an advocate, somewhat as a spiritual teacher, but I don't really think of it that way. But I kind of put that hat on from time to time too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you said something, practical spirituality. I like that. How would you describe what practical spirituality is as opposed to maybe impractical spirituality?
Well, it's a good question. And it's actually something that I picked up from the 12-step culture, which I've been a part of in and out for quite some time, over 20 years. And a long time ago, somebody said to me, or not to me, but they said it in a meeting, spirituality is nothing if it's not practical. And, what I take that to mean is that, and especially in today's, I think, modern sort of spiritual, but not religious, kind of greater transformational / new age movement, spirituality can be very kind of esoteric and very philosophical and very kind of heady and sort of also at the same time very airy and not very lofty. Yeah. And, I think if we kind of distill that and take the elements and turn it into something that we can actually use on a daily basis, I'm kind of more interested in that. We can kind of all talk about, the best laid plans and the best laid ideas, but we actually don't put that into action for ourselves. And then hopefully for others later on, it's not practical. It's not useful. It just becomes just chatter. So, that's kind of what I mean by that, with all the noise out there and, everybody kind of having their own platform, including myself, including you. We all have these amazing platforms. And I think it's really in our best interest to take those platforms and to make them into kind of constructive forums that people can actually benefit their lives from.
I agree. Yeah. Kind of like giving back a little bit.
Yeah. I think giving back a little bit and just, and especially in just kind of distilling practices in a way that makes sense for the individual. I'm a big believer in bringing the practice to the student, not the student to the practice. You could adapt and find whatever works for you and tailor it in a way that, hey, makes sense for you, and take the good and leave the rest, rather than, especially in like traditional spiritual practices and traditions and ones that can sort of default to a lot of dogma So oftentimes it's really sort of, hey, you're being told what to do. This is the path. Do it this way. There's no other way. And if you don't do it that way, you're going to hell. And, that's created a lot of problems over the millennia for sure. And I think that's one of the great things about the modern age is I think we can really just sort of piecemeal together a fabric, a tapestry that really speaks to our own individual hearts.
Yeah.
Mm.
It really is momentous times that we're in. I mean, if one turns on Fox News, it may not seem like it, but you just got to be able to turn on to the right thing, tune in, like your dad would say, turn on and tune in, but to the right thing, make sure you can either turn on to the darkness, the tumultuous world that we're in and get sucked into that, or you can, yes, build a beautiful tapestry out of your life and almost like almost like a ritualistic lifestyle, right? I see that as the ideal to the spiritual, practical life is like you build like almost a religion of your own life, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And it's a great way of describing it. And I really agree with all of that on, also in the same kind of token, in the same thread. I also don't believe that we should, bury our heads in the sand and avoid some of the darkness and the narratives that are out there, even if they're not necessarily true, but, still kind of keeping a little bit of awareness out there about some of the suffering that is happening in the world.
Yeah.
Just to keep because the world is such a smaller place now, we don't have the luxury to be able just to kind of isolate and avoid everything that others are going through, and just keeping a little bit of an ear and an eye and a heart open to what other people are going through as well.
I agree. So where would you recommend somebody start? Because there are a lot of paths. There's a lot of ways in, a lot of methods. But I think there's also some kind of similarity that we can touch upon in all of these different paths, all of these different ways in. So if somebody has no idea what we're talking about right now, hypothetically, and they're like, hey, Zach, I'm interested, but I don't know really how to start along this path. What would you say?
Yeah, that's kind of the $100 million question, isn't it? It's difficult. I think a lot of, I guess I would answer that by kind of encouraging everybody who's been exposed to some spiritual and or religious tradition, even if you grew up, a non-willing participant of a very structured Judeo-Christian religion, to maybe take a step back and still kind of, hey, well, what was it about that repelled you, or what was it about that spoke to you? Because there are many, like you said, there are similarities in all of these paths, and there are countless similarities between Jesus, the Buddha, Krishna, Allah, and Muhammad, and everyone. It's there's a lot of universal truths that find their way into all of these traditions. And I would really encourage an individual who is seeking is to kind of, hey, open your heart to what that universal truth is, and go out seeking, try different things. It really doesn't matter to me, but go find your local sangha, and if they have an open meditation on Saturday mornings, go to that. Go to a yoga class, go listen to Ram Dass lectures, try reading. There's endless books to read. It's just just keep trying different things until a little spark lights your heart.
Yeah.
And once that kind of happens, go with that. For me, it's everybody has their own journey, but for me, the spark was ignited multiple times throughout my life. Early on, I was introduced to the spark that kind of later really became a fire. But when I was younger, I really didn't have the discipline to really follow that. But it spoke to me, and the seed was planted. And then 15 years later, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. And I went back and I revisited it and just started exploring it. So I just encourage everyone to explore everything and rule nothing out.
Stay curious, right?
Stay curious. Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stay curious.
Stay curious. And stay open-minded, stay open-minded. I think anything that, maybe you've closed off your mind because the cognitive dissonance is so loud around, certain paths or traditions and maybe re-explore that.
I agree. I agree. So what was your spark, man? Would you want to get into that? What was the thing that was like, wait a second, that made you think a little bit differently?
Yeah, well, when I was a teenager, I was following the Grateful Dead around the country and, kind of a classic sort of American hero's journey kind of tale of following the Grateful Dead and discovering magic along that path and following them around. And of course, I'm very aware I did have the blessing of Ram Dass being part of our family circle. And a lot of those seeds were planted when I was a teenager, and, I read Be Here Now and really liked what Ram Dass, said and how he felt when I saw him. And then I got introduced as well when I was a teenager to the ISKCON movement, to the Hare Krishna movement. But at that time it was pretty fundamentalist. And, so all of that just sort of like, it was like, well, the seeds were planted, but I wasn't going to take any of that really on. It just felt too much of something that, I wasn't ready to be a part of, and too complicated and just too ornate and just sorts of things. And I kind of went on a different path that was, more due to finding my identity and discovering what my identity wasn't. Went on this whole other trajectory working in corporate America. And, like so many others, I hit a spiritual bottom. I just went on this path that I thought was the right thing to do. And after about 13 years of doing that, I realized, hey, that wasn't the right thing for me. And I was incredibly unhappy and bankrupt and just felt like I was living my life by default, no passion, no interests, and just kind of in neutral. But yet a lot of the external was okay. Like the paycheck was okay and things like that. And I just was sort of like the classic waking up to the American mythos, of like, oh, wow, that doesn't feel right. And then I revisited my relationship with Ram Dass, and things just changed from there. I kind of hadn't really seen him in a few years and never really thought of him as a teacher for me. He was more of just kind of a family friend. But then I revisited my relationship with him, and then it was like the sky opened up. It was just like I met him again for the first time.
After his stroke?
Yeah. It was well after his stroke. His stroke was in 97, and then I kept in touch with him for on and off for years, and then visited him again in 2008, and from that moment on, it was a very different relationship, and that was the spark that just it was like meeting him for the first time, even though I'd spent so much time with him. But yeah, everything was just different then.
Yeah, man, you have such an interesting journey in life. I can imagine you realize that, but you were just thrust into this incarnation with all of these icons and legends, and you're following the Grateful Dead around at such a young age, and you literally have Ram Dass as a friend, but yet it was like nothing to you because it was like you didn't know any different. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
You had to reach rock bottom in order to realize that you kind of had it all along. Ram Dass was there for you all along.
Yeah, he was there for me all along, and Maharaji's love and kind of a whole path that was kind of tailor made for someone like me.
Yeah,
it was there all along. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this one, man. I've talked to a lot of people that love Ram Dass, but I don't think they've ever met him. You have a personal relationship with the guy. So I imagine you have a different outlook on who he is just because simply like you're in the same room as him having conversations with the guy.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe who this figure of Ram Dass is to the world, having a relationship with him? Like, how to somebody, or going back to somebody that doesn't know any better, to somebody that has no clue who Ram Dass is, who is he? What is Ram Dass all about? What is his spirit? Why do we love Ram Dass so much?
Yeah, I mean, wow, that's a huge question. That's a,
I'm laying the
it's a,
big ones on you. Sorry, man.
that's a really, it's a big one. Hmm. Well, I think in answering that and kind of taking a look at it myself, it's really valuable and beneficial to understand the transformation from Richard Alpert to Ram Dass and who Richard Alpert was. These days we really take it for granted that, hey, we can live any kind of life we want. We can change our name. We could go to every transformational festival in the world and do whatever we want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in 1950,
you want this time around.
Yeah, it could be anything you want, but also externally, and finding our tribes is much easier these days. It's kind of everywhere. But 1950s America was a very different place. And, the story of Richard Alpert and, becoming this professor at Harvard University and, working in the early psychedelic field and, this guy who was really on this trajectory for like the American dream and accomplishment and status and tenure and getting published and all of those things. And back in those days and, moving into the mid 60s, expressing dissatisfaction with that path, that wasn't something people really did, it was like, what do you mean? That's everything. That's America. What couldn't you love about that? And then, as he was kind of going along the path, the incarnation of Richard Alpert and the frustration that he saw with some of the psychedelic work. And then when he went to India and met this person, this being, whatever he was, met this person who had a different map of consciousness, who had a different plane of existence.
Yeah.
And he was able to take a little bit of a shard of that light and bring it back to us here in the West. And did so like very few other Westerners ever have, Ram Dass was just a guy. He was just a man. Of course, he was burdened with humanity and his struggles, just like everyone else. Of course, I'm not putting him on that kind of pedestal, saying he wasn't infallible or anything, but he did get something very unique from Neem Karoli Baba that many of the others didn't get in such a profound way. He did get a shard of that light of unconditional love. And it wasn't an act.
Yeah.
It wasn't an act. It wasn't a pretense. Ram Dass did get in the yogic system, they call them siddhis, which means yogic kind of powers that you get from doing practice, from doing sadhana. And Ram Dass did get some of those siddhis. He really did get that capacity to beam you into a field of unconditional love. And it wasn't a joke. It wasn't pretense. It doesn't make, any of the mistakes he made as a human being erase any of those, but he did get those. And he did lay a map out for us to follow for all of his decades of work afterwards, to follow and to tap into and to really examine the very nature of what it means to be alive, what it means to be conscious, what it means to be a seeker, what it means to be human, and I think, the juxtaposition of Ram Dass having that core kind of foundation of traditional psychotherapeutic expertise into the inner workings of the human condition, mixed with the spiritual map and the spiritual plane, created just a curriculum, I think, of spiritual life that is second to none in Western life, for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, from what I've come to realize, what makes Ram Dass special is not necessarily Ram Dass. I mean, I'm not downing him, but it's his relationship with his guru. And
Yeah.
it's like his testament to Neem Karoli Baba. And yeah, it's feeling the faith of him to his guru, and it almost like transfers into us, because like we have to believe Ram Dass. That's part of the, that's part of the mix, is we have to believe this guy of who Neem Karoli Baba was. So what am I trying to say here? It's like what makes Ram Dass special, it's like it seems like he was a true disciple of Neem Karoli Baba, even though there was probably no actual initiatory process like we have in other lineages, but it's like he was really the chain of that love from Neem Karoli Baba to us.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and he was. And I do think that, look, there were many people who were in contact with Neem Karoli Baba as well and spent time with him. But I really do feel that Ram Dass got something that a lot of the others didn't. Not in an interpersonal way, but in an extra personal way. In that a lot of other people did get sort of that seed that affected them interpersonally, but Ram Dass was able to take that seed and also share it with others. And look, even if you get into Ram Dass and really dive into his work and find, hey, maybe the teachings or the vibrational quality that is Neem Karoli Baba doesn't speak to you, I still think that you can extrapolate the idea that, or the notion that, well, you can clearly see he believes it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, well, why does he believe it so much? Is he really bullshitting all of us? There's no way.
He's not. Yeah. I mean, he really got it.
It's true faith. It's true faith, like beyond the dogmatic faith. This is real in our lifetimes faith of a saint. And it's so crazy that we even get to have that in our lives and witness that in our lives. Not somebody 2,000 years ago that might have lived and, got translated from 3 different languages. Like, no, this guy, we have pictures of Neem Karoli Baba. And Ram Dass has so much conviction in who this guy was. And he gave it to the West. And it's up to all of us to be able to, I guess, I don't know, like get the message of what that all means. Like you have to get the story, because like I feel as though Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba is like a story, almost like the story in the Bible or story in the Vedas. It's a story that you have to understand and get. But once you get it, man, I don't know. Stuff just lines up. Like once you get it, that's when I feel like Maharaji enters your life. Like once you can understand the story, maybe that's just the start of Maharaji entering one's life. Like once you start, there's something, I know for me, something just clicked one day and I was like, wait, oh, I get it. And then ever since then, man, I don't know. I feel like life's been different. It's,
yeah, it feels like life has been different. And you said it earlier. It's like, I think real faith is a culmination and a belief in your own personal experience. Real faith is not just resting on the dogma of what someone else is telling you to believe, but it's really your own personal relationship and experience with whatever it is that you choose to follow. Exactly. Yeah.
So what is the significance of Neem Karoli Baba then to you? Because we explained Ram Dass, but now let's extend that to the source. Why is Neem Karoli Baba so important? Isn't he just a man?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly was just a man. I think he was, he took incarnation as a man. And certainly, from what I understand and what I've heard and what I've read, certainly dabbled in some of the kind of human incongruities of what it means to be alive. And I don't think he was a perfect man, but he, so in the Indian system of yoga and all of its lineages and paths and spiritual tentacles, I guess, there was a great tradition of saints, of Indian saints, right? There are not as many of them these days. Now and then, I still think one can manifest, but I think the modern world has made it more difficult for the true authentic saints to really appear and manifest and to teach. Now and then there's I think there are some exceptions, but for the most part, guys like Neem Karoli Baba or Ramana Maharshi or Ramakrishna or it's a long list. And then the Mayama and so on. They manifested in a very specific time where the conditions were very ripe. They were very ripe. And what that basically means is that they did sadhana, they did spiritual practice in such an authentic manner that they were able to connect to source. That's it. Or if you want to call source God, go for it. But, whatever you want to define as source. And they were able to connect with that field forever, and just be there. And Neem Karoli Baba was one of those, he really had true yogic powers, abilities, miracles, vibrational tendencies that are very, very difficult for most of us to attain. We hear so much, especially in the Eastern practices, the path of enlightenment and things like that. And, I always cringe when I hear that because it's like, I'm not trying to be cynical or trying to discourage anyone, but it's highly unlikely that you're going to get enlightened. I wouldn't count on it. I think the rest of us mere mortals are just going for something else. We're just going for peace, love, equanimity, balance, and maybe service if we're lucky. But, we're not going to get enlightened like the Buddha or Neem Karoli Baba, But those guys did. And they did. They are representations of what enlightenment actually is, realization, enlightenment, moksha, nirvana, whatever you want to call it. And I knew who Neem Karoli Baba was when I first read Be Here Now, and when I was 16 years old in the back of a Volkswagen bus, and I knew who he was, and I saw his pictures and went to Artie's house and pictures everywhere. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I don't know. But like that's in the earlier story, when I reconnected with Ram Dass in 2008, it was like I met Maharaj Neem Karoli Baba for the first time too. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the significance of Maharaji is that it's possible, even though we might not get it in this lifetime. Yes, he was just a man, but maybe a little bit more than a man as well. Or maybe he just conducted himself in a different manner than most men or women do, which that in turn made him saintly. So it's like he was proof of the pudding.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. I mean, he was proof of the pudding, and proof that, look, if you dedicate your life to a certain path and do it with authenticity and assuming all the external conditions are also right as well, you can achieve that state of being and that state of play. And I think, the great, kind of lesson from all of these saints, not just Neem Karoli Baba, but from all of them, is that even if you just get, and this is why the guru system, has its place, is that even if you just get a little shard, a little speck of that sense of unconditional love, that sense of transmission, and you just get to be in that field from time to time, it can benefit you on an ongoing basis. My contact is limited, but when I do drop into it, it's there. I feel it. It's authentic. It's real. Yeah.
It's realer than real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I don't even know where to go from here. This is good stuff. It's quite interesting that we live amongst these beings. I personally have never met a saint like that, I don't think. Not with anybody that I could feel is reading my mind. I've read stories from Ram Dass, from the Miracle of Love book, which I highly recommend to everybody.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff, it's like there's no way these people are making this up, and some of it is like, yeah, this guy is like a Superman. He somehow has these powers that there's no way all of these different people, and especially Ram Dass, are
Yeah.
making up. Um, yeah,
I've had a couple of them myself, which I feel very, very fortunate. I've had some kind of intangible, out of body kind of experiences with Maharaji's grace for sure. But I've had two darshans with physical human beings that have, I don't know, have rocked my world for sure.
I've heard a lot of stories of that. So what was the lineage?
Well, one was Amma, and another was Chota Maharaj, who was what they called him Little Maharaji, who was his ashram was a few doors up from Neem Karoli Baba's in Brindavan, and he died maybe about 10 years ago. Left his body, but I guess he was said to have been anywhere from 120 to 150 years old.
Wow.
No documentation, but they know for sure he was at least 115. And he was just a beautiful, beautiful little, very, very small, dreadlocks down to the floor, sadhu, who just kind of lived in his little tiny ashram there. And I got a transmission from him that was, that was pretty otherworldly. And then the other one was Amma, who Amma's, probably the most famous living Indian saint guru of today. And it was extraordinary. I mean, I could tell you the story if you want, but it was something else.
It's quite intriguing, man, how it's like these people, like they have I like to say it's like a chain. It's like something like they hold this power and they can bestow people with this power. I mean, it's not like power that we think of as in like superhero movies. It's just love.
Yeah.
It's just somehow they just open one up to love. It's kind of like a psychedelic experience, but with a human being. Quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, man. You said something before about how Maharaji was in a state of play. Would you say that is a commonality between all of these saintly people, is a state of play in this life?
I think so. Yeah. The idea of, especially in the Indian traditions and the Hindu traditions, this idea of Leela.
Yeah.
Leela is translated as the divine play. And when we talk about the stories of Krishna or Ram or Hanuman or whoever, we refer to it as Leela. So-and-so is going to give discourse on Leela of Krishna and Radha and their pastimes. And that it's a constant state of play and of being in a dance, and every word is a song, every step is a dance, and you're constantly in an interpersonal interaction and dance with these figures, intangible or not. And I think it's kind of looking at that. I mean, that's one thing that I find so attractive about that system of devotion and that tradition, is that it's very playful. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's never taken too seriously. There's a lot of song and dance. There's a lot of laughter. There's a lot of mischief. And, kind of that state of play. And if you read about Neem Karoli Baba, I mean, the guy was a constant trickster, he was always just in this field of just shaking things up,
Yeah.
And I think it's a beautiful quality to have.
I agree, man. Unless you become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, man.
Exactly. The kingdom of heaven is within, right?
That's it. That's what they say. Yeah. And that's how we bear the suffering and darkness here that we talked about. It seems to be like we just, I don't know. I was going to say you play with it, but that even doesn't even sound right. But I guess it is like that because we each have our own darkness and suffering and woes of the body. So I guess it's just like finding that sense of play within our own strife. And that's seems to be how we actually enjoy this life, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, if we take ourselves too seriously,
Yeah.
I think that's when you start kind of hanging on, you start gripping too tight, you
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
you start
Yeah.
grabbing onto to the side of the rails a little too tightly, when you start taking yourself and all of these things just too seriously. I think it's really important just to stay flexible.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta lighten up, stay flexible in the
Yeah.
mind and the body and the spirit, for sure, bro. For
Yeah.
sure. And I guess that's the purpose, the true, I mean, all right, so let's get into this psychedelics, man, because I know you're big into that. I'm big
Mhm.
into it. Would you say that's ultimately the purpose of psychedelics is to, I mean, this might be an oversimplification, but is to like just let go a little bit of your ideal of yourself, like what you think you are, and just kind of lighten up a little bit?
uh, yeah. Well, let's take mental health out of it for a second. Just putting that aside for a second, just kind of our everyday waking state of what it means to be human or on the path. Our minds have a very, very effective way of creating narratives and stories and boundaries around the idea of what it means to live within a so-called reality, right? And those stories include, our own life's path, our relationships with others, how others treat us, how we treat others, what we do, what we don't do, all of our actions, all of our success, all of our pains. And we take these stories in our view with others and projections on the world, and we have a knack of turning that into what we think is reality, right?
Yeah.
And human beings are so convinced, well, that is reality and that is not. Um, and I think psychedelics are perhaps the most powerful tool to create the initial break from that illusion. Sure, there are other practices you can do to sustain that. Psychedelics, you can't do them ongoing every single day. But they're a great way to snap the Maya.
Yeah.
To snap the illusion into, having that great awakening of whatever you think reality is, that's not it, and psychedelics will expand your worldview and showing you that there's just so much more out there.
Yeah.
So much more.
That there's another way, right?
There's not just one other way, infinite choose your own adventure paths,
Yeah.
It just can go on and on and on. And they have a very powerful way of getting you there.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I would say it's, I don't want to say I'm going to say it's the most powerful way to get there, at least the most efficient for what they are. Like, I mean, your life could change with 5 grams in 6 hours at hand. You know what I'm saying? 5 grams of mushrooms in one afternoon, and you could have a completely different trajectory of life after that.
No question about that. Absolutely. Yeah. They are the fastest way to disrupt it and accelerate you to that place. But what you have to do with that afterwards, that's kind of up to you. And that's a different story, know?
Yeah, man. I like to say it's like a 2-step process to this whole thing we call the path. It's one, realizing that there is a path, waking up out of the illusion of Maya. And then 2, actually walking the path.
Well, Ram Dass is the best example of that. He really is.
Yeah.
And the winter winter going into of early 67, before he went to India, he was living in the gatehouse at Millbrook, doing LSD every single weekend. And when he was still Richard Alpert, and so incredibly frustrated with the notion that you have to come down, and just thought, this isn't sustainable. This is not an ongoing path. And he had not figured out the rest yet. And he got the wake up, but he couldn't figure out how to integrate it and how to keep this into a sustainable paradigm. Then he went to India, became Ram Dass, swiped another map of consciousness. And that way, when he continued to do psychedelics, it was like, oh my God, it was this never ending play of like, oh, it's not about the peaks and chasing peak experience. It's just about expansion, And I love his story when I get into this conversation, because I think it is the most adept, astute, and important kind of case study for what integration means and how to do it right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was going to say he didn't do psychedelics after he got back from Maharaji, but I'm pretty sure he did, actually.
No, he did. He completely did. Yeah, it's a complete misnomer that he stopped. It's not true at all. He totally did psychedelics. Not as often, but he did do them. I mean, I did mushrooms with Ram Dass in Maui in 2012 or something,
Man, what was that like? What kind of conversations did you guys have?
Not many, actually. Not many conversations. There was a lot of staring at the sun and staring at flowers and Ram Dass saying yum 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 yum.
That's awesome.
And it was great. No, it was wonderful. I wanted to talk about Maharaji. He just wanted to talk about Timothy. So it was kind of this fun little play that we were in. But
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was great.
Wow, man. Yeah, I mean, do you think they are needed, psychedelics, for us to become a better people altogether? I know we can do it without it, right? But I think it would take a lot longer if we didn't have psychedelics at our disposal. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, and some ways I totally agree, and in other ways I'm not entirely sure. I used to be much more of a zealot than I am now today, because I do think that psychedelics can also accelerate qualities that are already inherent to the individual. So like a really just baseline stupid example. Let's just do it. Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that if Donald Trump had a heroic dose of psilocybin surrounded by the best curanderos in the world and the best container in the world, I don't think it would make him a better person. Mm-hmm. I think it would just accelerate his madness and his hatred and the darkness in his soul. He's already too far gone. Yeah. So I don't think that it can necessarily turn every single person around into a being of light and truth and love and compassion. I don't necessarily believe that. But I do think that those, and again, putting mental health aside, those who have kind of a capacity to already be predisposed to compassion and expansiveness and loving awareness and all those things, absolutely, they can certainly make a huge difference in our population at large, no doubt.
I agree. Yeah, it's like you have to have a little bit of a moral foundation before you go in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, there's certainly cases where, look, you can have been living in the darkness and really struggling with your own suffering, and psychedelics can show you some light and really help pull you out of that. But I think if you're already a fundamentally shit person, I'm not so sure it's going to help you.
Yeah.
Maybe next incarnation,
Yeah, maybe the next one.
Next time around.
Sure. I like to say that there is a definite correlation between psychedelics and one taking them and changing their ways. Is a definite correlation between that. I can see how it can change people, and it does, but it's definitely not a causation. It's not a guarantee. Somebody takes mushrooms and they become anew, but it helps. It definitely helps. It can help.
Absolutely, it sure can. I for the most part, I while I say I'm less of a zealot, I also, on the other hand, I contradict myself too, and saying, well, in most cases, you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah,
try. You've got nothing to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I'm just glad we even have these things at our disposal, because I If it wasn't for mushrooms, I don't think I'd still be caught in the darkness, man. You know, I'd still be just trying to, I don't even want to get into it, but I'd still be in a dark place. And mushrooms just help me see life very, very differently, very, very quickly. And yeah, they're
yeah,
sacrament, I think.
absolutely. They completely are a sacrament. And they've, I mean, the wonderful thing about them is that they've been a sacrament throughout
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
time. You know,
Yeah.
they're an integral part of the human story.
Yeah.
And have been since pretty much the dawn of man. You know, every single indigenous culture on the planet has had some interaction with psychedelic plants, you know,
Yeah.
except Eskimos because it's too hard to grow anything up there. But other than that, you know, and I think that's the beauty, and that's one thing I love so much about the psychedelic renaissance is that it's really reigniting this this connection with our ancestors, with our roots, with kind of an ancient wisdom paradigm, you know, that, you know, these tools have been here all along. And for us to rediscover them in the modern age is really, I mean, like you see so many correlations with people who use psychedelics successfully. They get back in touch with nature. They become a little bit more conscious about their surroundings. Maybe they start eating better. They certainly start treating people better, start treating themselves better. And it just really gets us more in balance with our ecosystem, you know, both internally and externally.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
How would you summarize the power of psychedelics for you personally? I know you've probably had hundreds of experiences in many different circumstances and situations, but again, going back to it, to the layman, someone that has no idea, that maybe they're interested in mushrooms, how would you describe what it did for you, at least?
It's twofold. It's kind of split into two halves. One, when I was younger and, you know, I probably started using them too early, but it is what it is. But when I was following the Grateful Dead around and all of that and discovering music and spirituality and community, and I mean, psychedelics just, wow, they just changed my worldview overnight, you know, really got me in touch with what I feel is the essence of magic and the essence of exploration and the essence of Joseph Campbell's own hero's journey and what that means, and just expanded my worldview into something that, you know, my life would just be so incredibly different had I not seen that, experienced that. And gosh, you know, those early experiences were just, I mean, they just changed everything, and just gave me this blueprint for how I see the world that, was forever different, you know? And then I took a little break because I struggled with substance abuse, and I kind of took a break from everything for a while. And then when I revisited them, then it sort of went from how like psychedelics changed my view of the external to how they changed the view of the internal. They really helped me understand my own demons, my own kind of penchant, my own style for suffering and why I default to that, getting me in touch with my own pain, my own fears, and really helped me kind of find a new way to grab onto some light and some love and my own self-love, you know? So it was kind of a twofold experience. You know, doing them as I got older is very, very different than doing them when I was younger. Much more difficult. Like I didn't really have a challenging experience when I was young. You know, it's just, I didn't have much life behind me. It was all so carefree. It was beautiful, huge heroic doses and just fantastic. But now as I get older, it's, I mean, I still really enjoy it, but it's definitely work. You know, it's definitely like looking under the hood and seeing, wow, okay, this is all these different, you know, qualities and experiences that I've had along the way that really can be sometimes really hard to look at, but always worth it. Always worth it. Always. Yeah.
That's the interesting part of it. Even though we can have these difficult experiences in the moment while we're tripping, afterwards, when we come down, it always feels worth it. At least for me, personally speaking.
Absolutely. Me too. It's
Mm.
always worth it. I always get something new from it. I always come back maybe just a little bit wiser and a little bit more aware of who I am.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Oh man, it's crazy. We're still living in the demonization of them. You know, the facade of the drug war that your dad fought so fervently
Yeah.
against. It's crazy that we're still in the midst of that with these such beautiful substances that show us light and love in our own life and ways to mitigate our own suffering. Yet they're still highly, highly illegal. It's such a travesty. I like to say it's a crime against humanity. And when these things eventually are legal, hopefully in the future, we look back at these times as a blight in the history of our species that we criminalized nature.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's crazy. But it is changing. It is changing.
Yeah, we're getting there.
We're getting there. Yeah, slowly we're getting there. And it's a good thing. And I think the mental health applications of psychedelics have really helped to move the needle for the entire movement, even outside of mental health, and the work that we see, the impact that psychedelics have had, like on our veteran communities and those with serious complex post-traumatic stress, and really seeing how that has impacted them and benefited them has really helped to change kind of the fabric for people outside of our circle.
Yeah.
So I do hold out hope. I think the climate is certainly better than it was 10 years ago.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. When people who don't believe see people that aren't hippies doing it, of the psychedelic people doing it, like veterans,
Yeah.
I think it sparks something in people, or could at least. I think it has the potential to spark something like that sense of curiosity we talked about, like, huh.
It sparks a sense of curiosity, but it also kind of sparks this sense at like tripping away at all the propaganda.
Yeah.
It's like for decades now, and you could go back to the 60s and early 70s, when you kind of see the psychedelic drug war propaganda that was fueled by the United States government. Go to YouTube and watch the propaganda films. They were made by the government.
Yeah.
And sadly, those were really effective. There are still so many people out there who believe that, believe that, oh my God, if I take LSD, I'm going to think I could fly and jump off a building.
Yeah.
Or if I take a huge dose of mushrooms, I might have a psychotic break and never come back, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's still like what you were just saying. And it's like, yeah, it chips away at all of that, but it also helps to redefine the narrative and just like the lies that the public has been fed around these things. Oh,
yeah, man. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Slowly.
It seems slow. But because Oregon, right? Didn't they just legalize it?
Yeah.
For psychiatric use, last year, 2 years ago?
Yeah. Oregon has, they're doing it. Colorado's about to do it.
Yeah. If that happened in the 60s, there would be a revolt. So think about that. It seems slow, but really it's actually not in the scheme of things. I mean, I don't know. Would you say it's slow, or in the scheme of things quick? Because I would say it's kind of quick. I don't know. I'm up in the air about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the amount of progress that's been made in the last 5 to 7 years is crazy. It's gone way. The last 7 years have happened way quicker than I ever thought that they would.
Yeah.
The strides that have been made is truly extraordinary. I mean, we're way further down the road than I thought we would be had you asked me 10 years ago. So, yeah, we'll see. The best is yet to come.
I think so, man. I think so. And then it would just be like a domino effect. All these states that do decide to pass legislature around it, other states will follow suit, and then ideally, I guess, other countries, and then kumbaya. We're in a psychedelic world eventually. Yeah.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. But I think, a huge, that also kind of ties into the greater umbrella of the failure in the war on drugs, not just psychedelics. I think everybody agrees. no matter what side of the fence you're on, that the war on drugs is a failure,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, all mind and mood altering substances, it's an utter and complete failure. And we've wasted trillions of dollars, incarcerated far too many people, especially people of color, decimate an entire generation due to this. And, so I think there's been a little bit of course correction that psychedelics have helped to spark.
Mm. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that psychedelics get grouped into the umbrella term of drugs too.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it isn't at the same time. It's like, I mean, obviously, like I'm not an advocate for, drug addiction, but I'm also an advocate for cognitive liberty, and that you have the right to change how you feel no matter what you want to do, hey, and I believe that's true for all substances.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. It's not like the laws are making people not do drugs. We're all doing drugs. Everybody's on drugs.
Exactly. And it's your choice, it's your choice. You have to exercise personal responsibility. And, every case study and all the data in the world shows that, once you start decriminalizing even things like heroin and cocaine, you are going to see more public support for harm reduction, for treatment, less criminalization, and hopefully less addiction. But, you have to look at this as it's a civil rights matter and a public health matter. It's not a criminal matter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man, we should all have the freedom to do what we want with our own consciousness,
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what your dad would say, right?
Absolutely. He said that from day one.
That's it. Yeah, man. I love your dad. Never met him. Was he a great guy? Was he as great as a guy as I see him as? Because I see Tim Leary and I'm like, damn, there's something about that guy. He was a great soul, like a great spirit. Like, was he a good dude? Good dad?
Absolutely. No, he was. He really was. He was a great guy. Had his struggles just like all of us. But he was a great father, and an amazing mind. I mean, he really was. When you hear that phrase, the smartest guy in the room, he really was the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Like every time.
And he was funny.
And, oh God, so funny. So funny. Yeah. So it's a great combination. He's great.
Sure. Comedic philosopher, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Miss him a lot.
R.I.P. Tim Leary, man. On that note, hey man, I think we could probably start to wrap this thing up. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Not really. No, I just enjoyed hanging out. Just the only promotional thing I'll say is if anybody's interested, I teach an online psychedelic studies course that starts again December 6th. Head to my website, zachleary.net, if you want to be a part of it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Zach. I appreciate you coming on here, sharing your time, effort, and wisdom with me and everybody that will watch in the future. Keep doing your thing, man. You're a real.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, likewise, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you. And peace and love to you. Peace and love to everybody.
Brother.
Goodbye.